Hello, everyone. My name is Kay Miles. I am an information architect at National Instruments, and today I'm going to talk about product documentation strategy, what it is, why we need it, how it's changed my life and career, how it could change your life and career, and I hope you guys get some good takeaways from this. I wanted to preface this with something that happened yesterday that I thought was really cool. I went downstairs to the unconference and someone put a little sticky note that said information architecture. And I was like, oh, my people, awesome, this is great. It's so hard to find you in the wild. So I go there and this table is so packed, they've already started dividing it into 2 tables just to have a conversation. People are sitting on the sticky floor of Lola's room and I'm like, whoa. People want to learn about this. People are interested. Hashtag no pressure on this presentation or anything. But what was really exciting was hearing people's different situations. And they're there to find answers. And unfortunately, I cannot give you answers. But what I do hope to do is give you a foundation, a starter point. I'm going to give you some terminology and some resources to hopefully point you in the right direction, and you can go out into the world and figure out what is this strategy architecture thing and have a little bit more guidance than you may have had before. So to give you all a little bit of context of the documentation climate I live in, we have many teams who create technical documentation at my company. We have software products, we have hardware products. All of these products are super modular and can be utilized together into bundles that we call systems. So then we have these special bundles that we have writers go for. And another really cool thing about these conferences is kind of getting an insight into the inner structure of companies. So one thing I'd like to share is that what's really cool about our company, all writers are under the same product documentation umbrella, which really helps us with our alignment. Our process at a high level is super aligned. It's very typical. I wrote this out and I was like, I don't even know how else you would create documentation besides being very irresponsible, but we follow the basic steps. And like any responsible department, we have a style guide, we have templates, we have process docs and a centralized wiki. We have all the right things that help you be aligned, and at the very least, at least make sure your documentation looks like it's coming from the same company. Unfortunately, my company's been around the block for longer than I've been alive. So over the many years, there have been multiple interpretations of this process, which is fair because we have a bunch of different kinds of products. So as documentation is written in these silos, it's going to happen organically that people find things that meet their needs. So for example, our software writers, they care about API reference, making sure there's contextual information that's showing up in the software. So they've created their own sets of tools and more granular processes that fit within that standard process to meet their user needs. Similarly, hardware did the same thing, but they have different care abouts. They want to ship printed documentation with the device. They want to document specifications. They care about things like safety and compliance because their products could kill people. So, they're dangerous. So, of course, they have their own different set of things. But our company's like, yeah, but you can use all these products together. So, as a systems writer, I want to grab a little from column A, a little from column B, and then put something special on top, and hey, you've got that bundle? Well, we've got the documentation set to help you. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. We get a lot of frustrated writers because, again, over many years, we've developed these siloed processes and documentation sets that they don't play nicely together. And so instead of letting our writers thrive in creating awesome content, they're wearing their troubleshooting hat more and more frequently. The technical writer title has gone heavier on the technical side and less on writing. And so a lot of our writers have become unhappy. And when you're letting them work on an MVP every single time, and I don't mean Michael Jordan, Kevin Durant, inner sports ball person here. I mean minimum viable product. And while I think there's a lot of power in an MVP, it lets you get stuff out the door faster, you get some feedback and you make it better. If you don't have time to address the feedback, then it doesn't feel very good. You don't feel like you're giving the user what they need. So, enter strategy to save the day. Now, strategy, it ain't new. And as a technical writer, I used to be a technical writer, FYI, I was very proud of my hat collection. I wore lots of hats, I had lots of responsibilities, and strategy is actually one of those hats. A writer is using strategy every time they sit down and think, okay, who's using this product? Why are they using it? What are they looking for? When do they need documentation? Answering those questions is strategy. So all a doc strategy is doing is taking that out of the product mindset and looking at the entire content creation ecosystem. And because I didn't want to leave my hat collection behind, I made a new hat collection. So within doc strategy, there are multiple fields, multiple roles, multiple responsibilities to make it successful. And they are information architecture, content strategy, and content engineering. Now these names have a lot of nuances out in the world, depending on your perspective. But when it comes to documentation strategy, information architecture is a lot like an architect for a building. They're building a blueprint. But instead of for a building, they're building a blueprint for information spaces, the design of that information space. So a lot of times this is associated with websites and web pages. Where's the navigation bar going to go? What kinds of content types are going to show up on that website? So the information architecture hat is often worn very closely with the content strategy hat. Because like strategy for my product documentation, strategy for the design of the information space is answering very similar questions. Who, what, when, where, why are users here, what's going on, what do they need? But they're more focused on content assets. And I say assets because they really don't focus on the actual content that users see all the time. They're mostly thinking of content types and content buckets. So what the information architecture hat and the content strategy hat do is that they design a really, really cool building with all the right rooms. And as cool as a written design is, it's not very awesome unless it's real, unless it's tangible. It's still very theoretical. That's where content engineering comes in. And they answer the how. They look at this design and say, okay, how do we build this? What sorts of ways are we going to source our content? What kind of CMS do we need to make this design a reality? How are we going to publish that content? How are we going to deliver that content? And so all of these things happen together to build a tangible, real building for information. And even then, that building is not very helpful without actual content, the stuff that the user actually interacts with. And that's where we want our technical writers to thrive. And without this sort of intent and planning, we end up with those really frustrated writers who aren't able to thrive in creating content to fill that house with really useful stuff. Now, one of the things that a doc strategy team like mine can do is we can look under the surface. I don't know if anyone knows the story of Titanic, but spoiler alert, it sinks. It's very important to be very thorough about what's going on under there. And unfortunately, without a team devoted to that, all you can really do, and I've had personal experience doing this as a writer, is fix what you can see. So I can have a user complain to me, where's the PDF version of this content? And as a technical writer, I can be like, I have your answer right here. Here's this really obvious link. It's got a PDF icon. You just click it, there it is. And I've appeased that user. What I don't know is that a writer on a different floor, writing for a different product, heard the same exact complaint, and they solved the problem differently. And all it takes is the different name for a link, a different position, to then provide an inconsistent experience for the user. And what we don't know is that there are users out there who are using both of our products in conjunction. So we are not helping all the users possible. Now you may say, well, we all live in the same org. Why don't we talk to each other? Well, we do. We high five in the hallway all the time. We are bros. But what's unfortunate is that ain't nobody got time to talk every single time a user complains about the documentation. It's not sustainable. While it's ideal, it would be awesome, we can't keep up. So again, we keep adding these band-aids above the surface, and all we're doing is persisting chaos in chaos. We're building our house of cards that eventually is going to fall and sink like the Titanic. I just mixed up metaphors, it's fine. So once underneath the surface, what doc strategy can really look at is, okay, user expectations are evolving, and we need to fix the root cause. We need to stop building more houses of cards on houses of cards. So a little bit into user expectations. They've evolved a lot since we've been, printing documentation to our users. And what they really want is consistency. Now, I'm not saying that users never wanted consistency, but what is happening is that in the world of the Internet of Things, where people have new and awesome different ways to see information, like if I can look at a text on my watch, well, that's awesome. But what's getting harder internally is that our infrastructure can't support making sure that the same content shows up in all those different places. And we can't manually predict all the different combinations that are going on. If I'm at an Apple store, I buy an iWatch, I have a MacBook, I expect those things to work seamlessly, and I expect the support to work seamlessly as well. And I don't care how Apple is structured internally. I don't care that there are different groups writing for the iWatch and different groups writing for the MacBook. If I'm going to search, how do I fix my problem, whether I'm looking from the watch side or the computer side, I expect to get a consistent answer. I expect to get a consistent experience. And when you have as many products as we do, that is very hard to do. Also, users expect Google all the time, no matter what. And while Google has done a very great job with their mission statement, and I'm not just saying that because they're all back there somewhere, what's happening is that users expect the answer, wherever that is, the answer to be one of the first results in a long list of relevant content that shows up. They also expect you to be a mind reader and finish just asking the question before you're even done typing it. It's insane. So again, these sorts of expectations are just part of everyday life, and they are becoming harder and harder to back up. So how do we meet these expectations? How do we fix that root cause? And the answer to everything is 42. No. Okay. Ultimately, our content ain't so smart. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. I may be a little biased, but I think our content is actually very good. I think we hire very good technical writers. But it's the content itself that's not smart enough to meet the demands of the evolving needs of our users. So what we need to do is invest in intelligent content. And what I mean by that is we can plan all we want. So remember that information architecture, that content strategy, that content engineering. What kind of building do we need to build? Well, we need to support intelligent content. And that's making sure that your content is findable, usable, useful. And there are ways to meet the needs of Google, right? You can have SEO experts, search teams, you can add metadata, you can do all these things, and we do some of those things. But with great power comes great responsibility, and if you just continue to do that ad hoc, if you don't have a cohesive blueprint to make sure that this is all being done consistently and reliably, then you're not going to get the power of meeting all of your users' expectations, no matter what's going on. So this is all great, it's all theoretical, but what does this investment in design look like? What do you get out of it in return? And this is a short story because I'm still on this journey where our teams existed for 3 years, and basically, what it looks like is going to sound really silly because the deliverables we give our writers are, we call them strategies. but they include templates, writing guidelines, process docs. These are all things that we've had the entire time. What's so special about the ones we're doing? And it's all about the things underneath sea level, the things you can't see. And it's the investment is looking at design. No one goes to your website and says, that was some sweet information architecture. I'm really digging that content strategy team. No, they are just happy, right? They're just happy people who've had a good time at your website. So again, it's not a tangible thing, but it's all about the thought and the process. So when we publish our new templates and our new guidelines and our new process docs, what we're trying to give writers is a more stable foundation to put their content in. We're giving them ways to think about their content that are decoupled from how it looks or how it appears. We're wanting them to look at this granular level and create that sort of stable content. So when this new awesome, 6G, I'm gonna make up a technology, comes in and we need to like hologram our content to someone's eyeballs, then we can do that because, that sounds cool, right? I don't know if that sounds cool, actually, it sounds kind of scary. But ultimately, we wanna be able to support that without having to completely rewrite all the good content that we've created. So it's really looking at things in a more rigid level, at a more granular level. So if you've heard of micro content, if you're familiar with structured content, they're very supportive of that. But you're basically wanting to tie all that metadata and all that rich context of the content at the smallest level possible, so that then you can support the flexibility and the adaptability of the world and the user's expectations. Now, some lessons learned, because I feel like I'm like preaching the vision here, but it's really, really hard when you try to implement this in real life, because changing how things have always been done is very difficult. And one of them is, apparently, when you want to go somewhere and take down the entire infrastructure and rebuild it the right way, it takes a long time. And so we've had a very slow progress. And as much as we can get buy-in to this vision, to this idea of letting technical writers write, whoa, crazy, mind blown, to build an infrastructure to actually let that happen is a very slow and thoughtful process. So unless you take those baby steps and find ways to show how it impacts your writers and your stakeholders and your users, then people are going to stop buying into it. They're going to stop trusting you. And we started seeing that. So one trick that our team does is we use a very Scrum-like process. So we can take these crazy visionary 5-year plans and turn them into bite-sized chunks, to pieces of work that we can then share to people and say, see, we don't have that nirvana yet, but we're here, this is us. And doing that means you have to be very vulnerable and very open and overly communicative, and it's a very scary thing to do, but it's so necessary to get alignment. Another area of lessons learned is this idea of more rules means you're stifling my creativity. And the last thing that doc strategy wants to do is stifle the creativity of a tech writer. This does not mean, just because we have more standards, just because we have more guidelines, does not mean that we are putting you in a box. We are not putting you in a corner. That's not how this works. In fact, the role and purpose of documentation strategy is so that tech writers can thrive in their creativity, so that when they go to that information house and want to put their content in it, they're not like, oh, the pipes are leaking, there's a hole in the wall, I've got to patch those up first, then I can put my content in there. No, we want them to have a stable home so that they can thrive with putting in that useful stuff. And now I talked about vulnerability, so I'm going to do that today and share a story of a project I worked on last year, because again, I think that it's great to talk about these in these abstract ideas and ways, but until you see like a real project and a real decision made, it's hard to really connect and see what can be done with it. So who here remembers or still uses CHMs? Yeah, there's a few of us left. Awesome. We're modern, we're cool. No, we're not. Okay. Well, back in the day when this new thing called the World Wide Web existed in the world, we realized we needed to put our help content on this internet thing. So internally, we created a tool that would take our CHMs and then break them apart into decompiled HTML help files that were web-friendly, and then we put all of those on the web so that they were findable online. At the time, this was wonderful. This was easy. I can write my documentation once and post it in all these different places. But over the years, I think we heard earlier about making the pros and cons of whether or not to build a tool internally or not. Unless you're invested in maintaining that tool forever, just don't do it, because that's what happened here. This poor orphaned tool was passed around to different parents over many, many years. And like I mentioned, how we had all these different processes and tools, we were trying to make this tool conform to all the different ways people made these CHMs just to post this online help. And what ended up happening was we created a process and a tool that when we surveyed the writers, this was the task of all those hats, of all their responsibilities. This was what they hated doing the most, was dealing with this finicky, terrible in-house tool. But even if it's painful, if it's helping the users, then we're okay, right? Maybe a little bit more forgiveness? No. Users didn't like this either, because what we were doing was we were taking content written for a completely different deliverable type and trying to put it on the web. This content wasn't written to be on the web. And so our users weren't really they weren't having it, and navigation was terrible, and it's just static HTML hanging out. So we're like, hey, we're strategy. We're trying to improve this infrastructure. You're yelling loud enough. Let's help. Let's do something. Let's make some decisions. So we did some research, and we learned that our writers spent cumulatively over 2,600 hours just using this tool, just trying to turn content that they've already written and put into this nice deliverable, never mind how outdated it is, and all they wanted to do was put that same content on the web. That's more than if one person was just doing this every day of the year for an entire year, they couldn't do this for all of our content. That's ridiculous. There were over 1 million live pages of static HTML floating on ni.com. And 80%, 800,000 of these pages were getting 0 views. And when I heard that, my little tech writer heart broke, because that is the most disheartening thing ever, to learn that I'm spending hours, painful hours, trying to make this content show up and no one's looking at it. And again, this isn't because the content's bad. I'm gonna put a lot of money down that all the answers user needed was somewhere in that content, but they weren't finding it. And as good as content as you can make, and I think a lot of people in this room know that, you can make the best piece of documentation, but it's only as good if it's findable. And people weren't finding this for whatever reason. So we had a lot of options on the table. Do we invest in improving the tool? Do we put an engineer on this? Do we buy a third-party tool? Is there a way to get this content online quickly and more easily? Do we invest in the user experience? Can we improve the navigation? Can we make this look a little bit more modern, more easier to use? Do we invest in adding metadata just to make it more findable? Is there something that we can do to approach this problem so that at least the content shows up? And with all of this, and I felt very, during Matt's presentation about business case building, I was like, that's my life now. We decided to make one daring decision. Let's just stop. And that freaked maybe everyone out. Because telling people to stop doing something that they've been doing for years is terrifying. It's scary. There's a lot of unknowns. Telling product owners, dev managers, marketing and sales that they weren't getting something that they just assumed that they were getting for free did not return in smiles at all. But the gain that we got was 2,600 hours. Hey, guess what, devs? Hey, guess what, marketing? Our writers can now focus on content, good content. Their plates are already super full. Now they can literally do anything else, and it's going to be more valuable to you and your product than this hellhole, is what I'm going to call it. And ultimately, how this is part of strategy is, again, seeing that vision, that infrastructure of content creation. You need to invest in an ecosystem, just like you need to invest in a product design. You need to make sure that the content can support it. So what this really did for us was saved writers lots of time. We had some content curators at least take down some of those million pages, so now it's just hundreds of thousands of pages. That's a little bit easier. But really it buys us time to invest in, okay, this is gone. What do we do to replace it? Let's start building that new nirvana of content intelligence. Let's get on it. And so this is really driving us, because now we have these expectations of, you took this away, you better bring something better. And that's exactly what we want to do. Now, I don't want to say this to scare you. I don't believe that this is impossible, but I don't believe that it is easy either. And I think that it's all worth it. Making these really hard decisions, putting this time and money and resources into thinking of these plans and these designs is important if this is true. And I like to try and believe what this guy says. He's pretty smart, right? So if content is king, then it's totally worth investing in a content creation ecosystem using information architecture, content strategy, and content engineering to support it. And I took a little creative license with this and thought, intelligent content is king, said this random girl on stage, but I think it's really true. I think that content is as good as it can be, has to be findable, has to be smart, has to meet today's users' expectations. And with that, I have some resources that I wanted to share with you all, because again, I gave you some terminology, but now what? How can you go out into the world and learn more about this amazing field, this upcoming thing? And one of the books that I love, basically these 4 books are like my new Bibles. They're always by my desk. I look at them every day. Designing Connected Content by Mike Atherton and Carrie Haynes is the how-to for content modeling. Content modeling is all about creating that stable foundation for your house. It has nothing to do with writing content. It's all about real life, mapping relationships, mapping out content attributes. It's very exciting, I promise. And it comes in a bright yellow book, so you're really happy when you see it. And I've never seen a book kind of go through the steps of how to do something so theoretical so well. So I definitely recommend this. Information Architecture, aka the Polar Bear book. This is a must in every information science course, and it has everything you could ever want to know about information architecture specifically for the web. It says and beyond, it likes to keep the door open. And this isn't really a how-to, but it does cover all the different aspects of information architecture that you want to think through as you design your own blueprint. Intelligent Content, a primer. Now, I mentioned that intelligent content is the actual answer to life in the world and everything we know, so you probably want to learn more about it, and a lot smarter people wrote a book, a good introduction into what is intelligent content, why do we need to support it, and how do we get started in our companies building the business case to sell it. And last but not least is Intertwingled by Peter Morville, who also contributed to the Polar Bear book. This book is a little bit more philosophical, but what it really does is underline the idea that information changes everything. And everything is connected. When you want to change something over here, butterfly effect, it's going to affect something that's going on over here as well. And so what I love about this book is while it's more personal, while it's more philosophical, if I'm ever in the weeds of a problem, or if I ever think it's just hopeless and nothing will go on, this book really grounds me, but also gives me that hope that it's all worth it. So thank you all. I am very passionate about this, so thank you for listening to me talk about this for 30 minutes. If you at all are interested in these topics, have your own ideas, have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.